Segwego and welcome to the KECTV podcast. I'm your host, Regan Jacobs, and today's program we're going to be talking about Bill 96 and the impacts that it's going to have here in Kahnawake and of course on our Kahnawake education system. And in studio today we have the Combined School Committee Chairperson, Dehotara J. Cross. He's also a post-secondary rep, and also from the Kahnawake Education Center, Bethany Douglas, who is the post-secondary distance counselor. Welcome to studio, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to jump right into it. Of course, there's been a lot of discussion happening in the community recently regarding Bill 96 and the impact to the Kahnawake education system. But it's not just the KEC that's being affected. We know that all organizations are really concerned about this bill and how it came about and the impacts it's going to have on Kahnawake as a whole. But it seems oddly familiar that they're starting at the education level, right? It's like the way to attack us, and in terms of our education, starting with our youth. So I want to get a little bit about how you guys feel. So we'll start with you, Dehotara. What has been some of the issues, concerns coming forward from the Combined School Committee?
Well, I think there's a lot of different issues that can affect the more technical aspects of running the education system and students, like the finances and stuff like that. But I think one of the big concerns that we have is about the students that will be affected. There's a lot of different things that can go into that, whether it be, just their encouragement to actually go into post-secondary, continue with that, or even if they are, the mental health aspect is a really big issue that's going to come out of this. People will feel discouraged, and so I think from that part, the Combined Schools Committee has to look at look at it overall and look at the aspects that are going to affect the students, but then also look at, how it's going to affect the other more technical aspects of it. But, I think our priority is always making sure that our students are, have the best opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree. So before, we're going to also have Robin Delarone joining us in a little bit. And, she's the Director of Education at the Education Center. But before she gets in studio, let's talk a little bit, just quickly, about the overview of Bill 96. Like, in your knowledge, how does it affect Kahnawake in terms of its larger impact? If you had to explain it to community members, what they should be concerned about, or its impact to the community, how would you say that?
If you want to look at it in a big way, it seems like another way of the governments to come in and impose themselves on who we are in our traditional aspects. We put in a lot of work since the walkout from Billings, all that time and all the effort that's been put in by previous Combined members, the community overall, and all those things can be taken away on the education aspect. There's a lot of effects that come into that. But then we also look at the other community organizations. I mentioned mental health. The services there will be affected. Employment. If our students don't feel comfortable going to certain fields or continuing their education, they won't be able to get certain jobs, and that obviously affects the different community organizations. So I think in a broad, bigger sense, it's another attack on who we are and our possibility of thriving in the world that we live in today.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's the general feeling that's coming, from the community level at this point. And Bethany, to kind of build on what he was saying, when you're looking at the success of post-secondary students that are already in the system, how would this add to the challenges that they face currently?
Well, we know that students already struggle with French as a second language, and that's not even just our Kahnawake students, right? That's the Anglo community within Quebec as well. So having to take more French courses than they already have. So in CEGEP right now, in pre-university programs, there's 2 French second language courses. This proposed bill would insert 3 additional courses. there was actually an update just this morning that changed it from core courses to now it's 3 additional French language courses for a total of 5. So when I look at our student population, especially now after 2 years of COVID, having to flip-flop from learning in person to learning online at the drop of a hat,
Right, yeah.
their mental health and even their physical health sometimes is affected by that, and students have had enough. So to add this onto the stress from COVID is now just, I think it'll make a big impact, like the Hotoraje said, on the mental health of students. So it's not only affecting their academics, like their grades, it's also going to affect their health too.
So they're really essentially asking in this bill to, amplify the amount of French language that the students will be exposed to in order to even graduate in their specific chosen field. And that's at the university level too, from my understanding?
There's no French requirement at the university level unless you're in a program that's related to, say, the medical field or law in Quebec. Those are the only 2 fields that we have Kahnawake students in that will be potentially affected. But it seems to be more of a CEGEP requirement. Like inserting those 3 extra courses, and in the past weeks, it's even the first tabling of the bill had also required students to pass a French test to leave CEGEP, but that's, with this morning's update, that's been kind of scrapped. So
Yeah.
I think just to jump into, I think where we see one of the bigger effects of how it will affect universities is when we look at the R score that students get in CEGEP. That sort of is a big determination of whether you will get into the university course you're pursuing. So if you're failing these additional, or even just the courses that you had initially, if you're failing that, it's going to negatively affect your R score, and universities will look at that and say, okay, maybe we can pick this francophone student who has these marks over the one who has a lower R score.
Right. And what is the feeling, you must get some feedback from students currently around, their exposure or their need to take French at CEGEP level already. What's that feeling already out there?
I'm not sure if students really understand quite yet the effects that it'll have on them. I know local media has been promoting Bill 96 and the impacts it'll have. We haven't had too much we haven't heard like too many student voices on it quite yet. So maybe that'll come in the near future.
But are students already struggling with the French that they need to take right now? Is that an issue?
Yeah, for sure. And that's, students who attended the community schools for elementary, secondary, those who didn't, it's really across the board. Like there are some who will excel no matter what, absolutely. But we do also have to think of the entire student body and, where they're coming from, their community background, our language and culture, the work we're doing here to revitalize language and culture. And then once they leave the community to go to post-secondary, what does that mean? You do all this work in community and then we don't have CEGEPs or universities here. So when they go, let's say, to Dawson or Vanier or McGill, how does that come out? They come from a place where they're so secure in their language and culture, or maybe they're not, that's fine too. But then, like the Hotoraje was saying earlier, this bill is just another effort at essentially colonization, right? So that's, it's going to have a major impact on student life in general.
There was some discussion just this week regarding, the thoughts around, this being another form of assimilation, another form of, dealing historically with Bill 101 and some of the issues we faced back then, like you mentioned earlier, regarding the walkout for Billings, and then how, Kahnawake Survival School was birthed and all of that history. And so if you look back at the community and the efforts that that we've put in as a community to revitalize language and culture, it does seem like it's almost like an attack, but not just here in Kahnawake. And we can step outside of our community for 1 second and talk about the English-speaking community, that which we don't always align with, but we can understand their plights or the issues that they face too here in the province of Quebec. There was a lot of discussion around the political aspects of this bill and land and language and the inherent rights of Indigenous people, but we know that the English community feels attacked also. And so in the grand scheme of things, it just seems like, and there was some discussion around this about Quebec and their sovereignty and their approach to sovereignty. It just always seems very underhanded. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, definitely, especially since it's an election year. It is very political. And I think living in community, I don't know, we tend to view everything through a political lens because it is. Mm-hmm. It is.
Yeah, and I definitely see it. I work with Champlain College St. Lambert as an Indigenous student support worker. And we work with Indigenous students, but we also work with the faculty and others. We talk a lot with other students who aren't from Kahnawake. And we could see that around these election years, this always comes up, whether there's a big push where there's not going to be as much acceptance rate for Francophone into English CEGEPs, and it gets people in this big stir, and people are worried, okay, well, if I can't get in there later, I got to get in there now, and that pushes a lot of different people out of the CEGEPs they thought they would be able to get into. Mm-hmm. So it always seems that it's strategic. It's, if the election's coming up, we got to put our big push out there for the French language and hopefully get those votes. So yeah, it's very political.
Right. So how do we move forward? I know that, the Kahnawake Education Center is developing a plan, some strategy around this, collaborating with the other organizations because it has such a vast impact on the community. But from both of your perspectives in your position with the KEC and the Combined School Committee, where do you see this moving forward, and any strategy so far from either on your end?
Well, I think as you mentioned, the KEC has reached out to other organizations. There's meetings, there's strategic planning sort of on how we're going to tackle it. Mm-hmm. But I think at the end of the day, we've seen it time and time again. It comes down to being a community, and I think that's really what we got to show, is that we're all in this together. We're gonna go and fight this basically attack again, figure out as a community how to stick together and be a collective on how we want to approach. So even if there isn't something happening today, or tomorrow, it doesn't mean that there isn't something coming and that we're not working all together. Yeah. Sometimes it's important to be strategic rather than reactive. So I think where the community is coming together, and that will definitely have a stand.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And in terms of you were mentioning strategy, I've been speaking with my colleague Chris Leclerc, who's also a post-secondary counselor, and we're thinking about things like tutoring. If this bill passes, if these amendments pass as is, we're going to have to start thinking of things like tutoring, and how do we fund that, and will there be a limit? How can we support students who will be made to take these courses if they choose to stay in Quebec?
Right.
And then on the flip side, how do we also support students who choose to leave Quebec? Because I think there will be an influx of students, actually an exodus of students from Kahnawake to schools like Algonquin College in Ottawa, St. Lawrence College in Cornwall, and the various other Ontario colleges that we're in close proximity to. We already have about 8 to 10 students at those Ontario colleges. And just speaking with them in the last few days about Bill 96, they made mention that the reason they left was because of the French.
Yeah.
Some of them went to community schools, some of them went to Billings, and they made the choice and they were like, no, we're going to Ontario so that I don't have to do the French requirement.
Right. And that's a concern. Like the financial impact to the education system has to be, will be considered, but it really does have to be, because if you look at resources, we're already quite limited in what we can do. Our funding has always been an issue, here in the community. And even though we've had some advances in that area, you only have so much to go around. So for sure with, as you mentioned, the tutoring, but also the number of students that you could potentially service is definitely a factor.
Right. And especially because Ontario colleges are significantly more expensive than Quebec CEGEPs.
Oh, they are? Say they know that too.
Yeah,
So.
they are. So like maybe the most expensive CEGEP, I would say, public CEGEP, is probably about close to $300 per term. Which is well within what the KEC covers. However, Ontario colleges can be up to $2,000 per term.
Wow.
So
huge difference.
Yeah, huge difference. And then if we get an influx of students choosing to go to Ontario, that's gonna increase our budget. Well, not increase the budget, but put more pressure on the budget to be able to cover those students.
Right. Tehotaraja, you are you currently in university or okay? So what are your thoughts like around this? Just as a student who's come up through the education system and is currently still in school, it's not directly impacting you, but as somebody who's been through, and is currently still studying, what are your personal thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I had quite the journey through CEGEP to get to Bishops where I am now. And it's directly because of the French courses. I had a really tough time getting through them. I failed multiple times. I had to go to the uncredited and work my way back through. And with that, it pushed my program to be 4.5 years when it was supposed to be 3. And for me, that put a lot of pressure mentally. And I'm not scared to say, if this bill came through, I don't think I would have lasted through CEGEP. My last few semesters trying to get through that last French were really difficult, and trying to figure out man, how am I going to get through this mentally? Just that aspect of it was really tough. I eventually made it, but it wasn't easy. So even though it doesn't affect me now, I know there's a lot of students who have the same journey or will have the same feelings that I had. And it'd be really discouraging if it did go through. I'm not to talk about myself too much, but while I was in CEGEP, I was part of the group that created the Indigenous Student Ambassadors Program. We won every single award that is given to community or clubs.
Right.
And then at the end, I also was awarded the Lieutenant Governor's Award of Quebec. So I got those awards. Thank you. I got one from the Lieutenant Governor of Quebec, but I was still struggling every single day trying to get through CEGEP.
Right.
So it's sort of like you can succeed everywhere else, but this one French course and these additional French courses that might come through can completely derail that. So I just want to try and make sure that this does not go through, so that people don't have to go through the struggles that so many of us are going through even today.
Right. Well, Naogo, for sharing, for sure. And, obviously that offers us a glimpse into the realities of student life, along with what, our students could potentially be facing here, and the impacts of Bill 96. So I want to thank you both for coming in studio today. You gave us a lot of great information. Any last thoughts to wrap it up?
No, maybe just to reiterate the fact of what the Tehotaraja said, that we will come together as a community, in the same way as we did in 2015 2014. I believe it was the First Nations Education Act that the federal government had proposed. And we as a community came together and, protested that. And we did a march, we did protests, we wrote letters. That was the year that I started at KEC. So I remember that very vividly. So I just wanted to reiterate that, that community aspect is what brings us together.
And I think like on a final note too, I would like to encourage all the students who are currently in post-secondary and even the ones who are in high school, to use their voices. Their voices matter. We have to listen to them. It's their future. We talk about the 7 generations all the time, and they're one of the generations that are coming up, so it's important that we listen to their voices and that they use their voice.
Okay. Well, Nyawagoa. And of course, this is just the beginning. Kahnawake hasn't even begun to, do a lot of movement in this area. So it's going to be interesting to see where we're going to go in the next couple of weeks for sure. But we're going to have Robin Delarone join us now, Director of Education, and get another side to this and how it's impacting at the community level. So don't go away. We'll be right back. And welcome back. You are watching the KECTV podcast, and joining us now in studio is the Director of Education, Robin Delarone. Welcome. And of course, today we are talking about the Bill 96 and the impacts here in Kahnawake. Now, this has been on your radar. It's come up and it's causing quite the stir, as it should be at the community level. But tell me a little bit about your thoughts on Bill 96 and a quick overview for community members.
Okay, first of all, just to give everybody, I guess, a bit of background in terms of where this came on our radar right from the beginning was back in February, March. For those who don't know, I am the Kahnawake representative for the First Nations Education Council. And sitting at that table are directors and reps from the various 22 communities. And there is a big representation there, of course, First Nations communities who are French-speaking, and there's a few who are English-speaking communities. And at that time, there was concerns raised about this impending bill. And the concerns, of course, were primarily from the English-speaking communities, saying we need to look into this. This is going to be something that will definitely challenge our students and their success. Yeah. So that being brought to our attention, of course, the FNEC, what their role is to represent the voices of the communities, and from there asked for direction in terms of, do you want us to further explore this, analyze, and go forward and work with political bodies? So we definitely said, yes, you need to start working on this, specific for education, of course, the sectors for us as education. So they did go ahead, started exploring, talking with ministers, with the AFNQL and the chiefs. So things moved in that regard early on. And doing, of course, a consultation, looking at a thorough review of the bill from the AFNQL and the FNEC representatives, technical people, looked at it and analyzed to see, what would be the impacts, and look at that, after we've analyzed it, these are some proposed amendments that we recommend, and also looking at it and saying, we recommend you do this as well. But as with everything else, in, I guess you could say, history, what we see and know and have experienced is, these things were neglected. The recommendations were, not taken seriously. And the chiefs were then basically put to different, now go to the Minister of Ed, and the Minister of Education might make some exemptions for you. Right, so, might make. So, that's where it was. Mm-hmm. And of course, at that high level of political, relations, we could see that things just were not happening, Mm-hmm. So at that point, yes, it came to be where we had, it started to bring, concerns, issues at community level of like, okay, what is happening? We hear it's coming closer.
Feels oddly familiar,
Yeah.
right? And it's not shocking. There's not that much movement at that level.
No.
Yeah.
So with that, that's where it was, okay, we're not making movement here. Do we, once again, as a community, have to now bring this, as Kahnawake Rono, look at, what do we do now? Our voices are not being heard, our rights are not being acknowledged, and relationships are not being respected. So that's where we're at right now, is when you look at this bill, we were looking at it from an education sector and how this would affect our students. But when you look at, that phrase, that statement we're always saying, our children are our future.
Yeah.
Well, if this bill definitely impacts the students, they are our success. And if they're not successful, we're not successful as a community and the future generations. So it impacts them, their future. It impacts different orgs when you look at the analysis of that bill and their employability of Kahnawake Rono into specific professions. So they're impacted, and when meeting with everyone, we could see that this wasn't only education related. It was at a high level of human rights. We're looking at our, all of the different, our inherent rights and our right to determine self-determination, what we want.
Yeah.
Really disrespecting a lot of the, calls to action. Truth and reconciliation, totally ignored by the provincial government. We looked at the different commissions that were put together to do reports, and whether it was social services and other areas, and what they recommended for the province of Quebec. So this is, huge. This is really huge, and it really, there's so many areas where it, in education, that it puts so many barriers for our students' success, whether they go to school on reserve and whether they go to school in provincial private schools as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's really just starting to come out into the community, and it has moved through, like you said, various levels of review. But it's not surprising that at the government level, there's no action happening on that. And I know that we discussed this, in the broader sense, that it feels oddly familiar, and history tends to repeat itself. And there was a lot of emphasis on that in some of the most recent discussions. When you look at this, as an overview, what are some of the most concerning areas that people should really be aware of at this point?
Number one is, I know in Kahnawake we've been highlighting CEGEPs and academics, but it's not just that. So the person who's sitting there saying, "Oh, I'm not a CEGEP student, I'm not, looking to pursue that," it's going to impact you if this law passes. So it's really important that everyone understands that. Because whether it is in terms, when you look at it for education, it could be your children in the future who want to pursue education and are going to have barriers there for them. It could be in terms of services you want to attain. For example, you may find one day that yes, you need to have an occupational therapist for your child. You need to have a psychological assessment. There could be different services that you need that you may not have access to in English. Our hospitals, you want to have the best care, and I mean, I thank everyone whose professions who are there, who are non-Kahnawake Rono, but in terms of our own, who want to strive to become doctors, who want to become, legal, lawyers, there's so many barriers there that, have our people being in these workforce, taking care of our own, that it's limiting them in the care that you're going to receive. So we have to look at it. There's many barriers that everyone is going to face, and what's happening is that once Quebec continues to not acknowledge the First Nations people here, and even consider them in terms of recommendations or consultation, then what we're looking at is, again, it's just more assimilation.
Yeah.
You know, we're more assimilation in terms of our language, losing our language, assimilation in terms of, just compliance. Okay, we have to do this, okay. And that's, really when you look at the broad sense of this bill, we can't just back down and comply and say, okay, we'll figure something out,
Yeah, because it starts at the education level, but in the province it works its way out. And we talked about the English language community feeling like they're under attack, and like you just mentioned, services, court and policing matters. It goes much further than just the education system, but even people's rights to access things in the English language. But one of the you had mentioned earlier about the basic human rights, and it almost seems like in Quebec there is this lasting movement from the 80s and even earlier, basically shoving the French language down people's throats. And Kahnawake has always kind of been a stronghold to create movement around political matters and our Indigenous rights, but I feel like maybe we are more in a position now with the number of growth in the community and the awareness around the political struggles here in the province, but it almost feels like this is just creeping up, and it continues to creep up, and there looks like there's no end to it until they get what they want, which is ultimately to become their own nation. And there's a lot of discussion around, doing that on land that was never theirs, and there is a huge political and social impact to this.
Yes, there definitely is. And I mean, that's why I'm saying is that when you sit at the table and from the FNEC, you have the other communities who speak French. But it still is a challenge for them as well. Even though they speak French, it's still challenging their rights, their lands, their who they were and who they are. So it is a big challenge, and it never ends. Yeah. And I'll just say it's interesting, in terms of the position I'm in right now. We reference Bill 101, which is part of this, this bill is just strengthening Bill 101. Yeah. But I remember I was a student back in the day.
I was like, you were part of that walkout, correct?
I was in that walkout. Yeah. I did attend Howard S. Billings for 1 year in grade 7. I do clearly recall hearing about this eligibility certificate, and clearly recall community members. I remember, them saying, we're not immigrants. How dare they? Dare they say that we should be applying to be able to, receive English as a instruction, and we have our rights, and we determine what we want. I remember that, and I remember, sitting on that bus outside of Howard S. Billings, just waiting. Young, you starting to understand things, and I remember waiting, and part of me hoping that, oh, please let them accept us. My friends are there. I'm used to this place. I want to go back in, and then coming out and saying no. And then it's like, oh, okay, what's happening next? What's going to happen next? And getting off the bus and marching with the community. And it was so powerful, though. It was so powerful to be marching, coming back to Kahnawake, pride, and I'm even getting choked up.
Yeah, of course. Talk about foreshadowing, like your whole career and passion that you ended up, doing in the community all these years. Yeah, that was like that seems like it was the start of it.
And exactly, then coming there and saying, now what? What do we do now? And it was like, where am I going to school? What's going to happen to me? So obviously there was with the strength of this community, with the parents, whether it was everyone, regardless if you were on council, regardless if you were traditional, whoever you were, you knew this fight had to happen. Yeah. And it did. And now looking at it, I do recall, I know someone, like I said, referenced and mentioned, that fight wasn't over. Mm-hmm. Yes, we needed to keep pushing on. We needed to
Yeah.
say, you know, those eligibility certificates, no. Even if
Yeah.
you go to Billings or anywhere, we shouldn't have to apply for them.
Yeah.
You know,
And it is a strange thing to be asked, like even now, like, do you have eligibility to attend school in Quebec? And you're like,
right.
"What?"
And those are one of the in this act, this bill, those are some of the recommendations, amendments that are being asked for, that we don't have to apply for them. So really what we need to do is Quebec needs to sit with Indigenous First Nations communities,
Yeah.
reopen that bill, look at it again, and look at the amendments that were recommended there. Because in those amendments, in there, what is being asked for is things like that.
Yeah.
Overall exemption. So we don't have to be applying for eligibility certificate. So these are some of the things that, even though we're seeing, okay, they've taken, they backed down on a few of the requirements, there's still so much work that needs to be done there.
Right. Well, even those discussions with Quebec, with the French, you know, the Premier Legault, there's been a lot of circular discussion with him and his office, and a lack of acknowledgement that is, you know, has infuriated people, and that's not going away. And you're hearing that come out at the community level. You know, the lack of acknowledgement around land and language, and so I feel like this bill is certainly pushing people to a boiling point, and you know, with history seeming like it's repeating itself, the community is not far behind in terms of calls to action. Though I know that there is some strategy being put forward by a lot of the organizations, but you know, you collaborate with a lot of these organizations. So what is some of the reaction that you're getting, and you know, that's creating some movement at the community level?
Well, first of all, you know, meeting with the different sectors, and first of all, the directors too from the different orgs, you know, they are extremely concerned. I mean, this has been ongoing for them with the French language, not just with this bill now, but it's been an ongoing challenge for them. You know, just like for education for our students. So for them, it's some of them are having to look at alternatives because they want the Kahnawake Rono to work in the workforce, to work in these jobs. So it's a lot of time and effort of looking at alternatives of how do we, you know, get through these challenges. So we service our clients, you know, in most best way that we know how to service our clients. So they're very concerned. You know, health and social services, this is for them. It's been an ongoing battle. And you know, for say the political bodies too, I mean, they're currently, you know, analyzing from a legal perspective for Kahnawake, what does this mean?
Yeah.
So together we're looking at it of, okay, how does this impact health and social services? What can you do? Because I am not an expert in health and social services in the political realm too. So everyone is coming together, looking at, you know, how this is impacting, going back to see what regional bodies are doing in terms of addressing this bill. And that right now is part of the strategy. You know, MCK looking at the political part, of course, doing a legal analysis of this. Looking at, you know, strengthening their contacts and seeing what's happening. We look at, you know, we're getting calls. I'm getting calls, and from the English sector. The Parents Association saying, you know, can you join us? We need your voice, you know, will you join us in fighting this bill? So we're also are looking at, as the orgs together, looking at a communication plan. So really, we know that we have to get more info out to our community, Kahnawake Ronu, to understand what this is. Our organizations too, and different sectors need to understand what does this mean for us if this bill is passed. So you know, we're doing that collectively together. We're looking at a communication plan, getting awareness out there, information out to everyone. And we're going to be meeting back next week to see, you know, what is happening. I did attend, you know, a meeting with the Mohawk Trail Lawn House, was invited to give awareness, to talk about the matter. So the lawn houses in themselves are discussing this. So it's, once again, it's everyone involved in understanding and having a voice about how this is impacting us, or going to impact us.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, well, the you know, Bethany and Tehotaraje mentioned earlier about some of the financial impacts to the community. I don't know if you want to expand on that, but I think that is you know, worrisome for sure about the future of, you know, being able to fund students.
Right. So just to bring some awareness to community, post-secondary funding and how you allocate it, it differs in different communities and so forth. So Kahnawake, in terms of how we administer post-secondary dollars, has been something that has been decided by the community, so by the KEC with the Combined School Committee consultation and approval and understanding. So when we get these dollars, some of the things that we have to look out for, and what we've always looked out for, was always to have a cushion there, because there's so many things that can happen in terms of Bethany talked about the tuition rates. Now, you never know. We always can anticipate we have this much dollars. Okay, and this is normally how many students who come to our door, and we can say, yes, we can provide that amount. But you never know in terms of tuition dollars, even in Quebec, if they're going to increase. So you always have to have more there in case we have to make sure we have more tuition dollars for the students. Now, on average, we know, like I said, what comes to our door and what we can allocate. But if this happens and we see that exodus occurring, now what do? I mean, we have to go back, we have to look at our dollars. We now have to say, okay, if there were 200 coming, and we may have to cut this down to, with what we have right now, maybe only 150 students who we can really provide tuition dollars. We then would have to look at transport, because that's extra transportation. Right. We'd have to make decisions now. Are we giving increases? You know, all of these are big decisions.
And how do we choose? And,
yes. So this impacts, and then the parent, the single parent, or the families who have, you know, are home. Yeah. They want to take courses. They want to go back to school. Someone might want to, you know, go back to school. They're not going to. You know, how are you going to continue and go back and go to CEGEP and take courses?
Right, and it's already challenging.
Yeah.
It already feels challenging at that point. So,
right.
Lots of concerns in a multiple, you know, areas. But, you know, just to kind of wrap things up, what are some of your thoughts about moving forward and strategy? I mean, obviously we don't want to give everything away because we're still in the midst of, you know, planning, but there's definitely going to be some reaction at the community level. So how do you see this moving forward?
I think the first thing is, like what I said, is a lot of information, like what we're doing right now. We really need, it's really important, even our students, that's what we're planning for, the students, even not the CEGEP, but the high school, everyone having awareness of what this is about, and really understanding why we're letter writing, why we're sending letters out, why we're speaking about this, and why, if we're partaking in rallies, like why. So that if you're addressed, you can speak to what the issue is.
Yeah.
You can really voice what your concerns are. So moving forward, yes, it's going to be a collective, or, you know, we have to talk about, you know, aligning our efforts in terms of with other First Nations communities or our neighbors, you know, in this, because it does affect all of us.
Yeah.
So moving forward, you know, it's just a continued meetings, continued discussion and sharing, and making a plan. But you know, from education perspective, it is about really, with Quebec, anytime that they're going to be proposing bills, where's the consultation? Where's the thought and consideration with First Nations?
And there was a lot of discussion around that. The lack of consultation is just so disrespectful, you know, on so many levels.
Total ignoring that we were here, that we are here, and that our needs, our differences, we have a perspective in all of this and how it impacts us.
Yeah.
So it's almost as though, you know, the Quebec government just wants to move along, disregard the history, disregard, you know, all of the calls to action, the language, the law, the bill, the law, Indigenous language law, disregard everything, even in the history and the courses that they deliver in the provincial system. It's the depth of it, the content is total disregard for who we are, or acknowledging. So there's a lot of work here. It's not just, you know, it's multi-pronged. There's so much work that has to be done.
Yeah. Well, I am confident, though, in our community, in our system, that, you know, we're here to stay. We have something to say, and we're just at the beginning. So Kahnawake for joining us. It's a lot of information, but we're going to be providing, like you said, a lot more information to the community in the next coming weeks, especially, and some calls to action here at the community level may be happening, but we're not going to let the cat out of the bag. So thank you, Robin and Kahnawake for joining us. You're tuning in to the KECTV podcast. It's new this year. We're just launching it in the fall time, but more to come. So stay tuned as we will be giving out more information on Bill 96 in a multitude of platforms, not just here, but we will keep you guys aware as we move forward. So Kahnawake, anigawahi.